Something is happening in Washington right now that should stop you cold. The President of the United States skipped his own son's wedding to remain in the Capitol. Defense officials across the city canceled their Memorial Day plans. Intelligence staff have been recalled. Overseas rosters are being updated. People are standing by for orders. This is not a scheduling coincidence. This is not bureaucratic routine. This is the operational posture of a government that believes it may be hours away from making a decision with consequences that will ripple across the global order. And the country that triggered all of this is Iran. I want you to think carefully about what that means. Not in terms of headlines, not in terms of breaking news alerts, but in terms of strategic reality. Because what is unfolding right now is not another round of diplomatic theater. It is not another cycle of vague threats followed by quiet retreat. What is happening as of this moment is the convergence of three parallel pressure systems: a collapsing negotiation track, a military posture that has moved from deterrence into pre-strike positioning, and an Iranian regime that has made a decision, deliberate, calculated, and extraordinarily dangerous, to push the world's most critical energy corridor to the edge. If you have been watching this situation from a distance, assuming it will resolve itself the way these crises usually do, I need you to reconsider that assumption today, because the signals are different this time. Let me start with the diplomatic track, because that is where the clock is now running loudest. The United States delivered what officials are describing as a final offer to Iran. It was transmitted through Pakistan, not through back-channel whispers or informal contacts, through an official diplomatic channel, which itself signals seriousness and urgency. The offer includes provisions that, by any objective measure, represent a significant American concession in tone and scope. Among the reported elements, free nuclear energy for civilian purposes, guaranteed and permanent. The kind of offer that would allow the Iranian government to stand before its people and claim it achieved something tangible. But here is what is critical to understand. Iran has not accepted. There has been no substantive response. There has been rhetoric. Loud, familiar, predictably defiant rhetoric, but nothing that constitutes movement toward agreement. And the administration has made clear that it is now actively planning for the scenario in which Iran says no. That planning is not theoretical, it is operational. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking to NATO foreign ministers in Ängelholm, Sweden on Friday, used language that was striking enough to make the room go quiet. He told allied partners directly, "We also have to have a plan B. We have to start thinking about what we do if a few weeks from now Iran decides it doesn't care, that it's going to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, that it's going to sink any ship that doesn't pay its toll. Then someone is going to have to do something about it." Read that statement carefully. Rubio was not speculating about a distant hypothetical. He was telling America's closest allies to prepare mentally and strategically for a scenario in which military action resumes. He was doing it in a room full of NATO foreign ministers, and he was doing it on the record. That is not the language of a government that believes negotiations are going well. To understand why this moment is so serious, you need to understand the architecture of the threat that Iran has built, and why it is not going away through diplomatic pressure alone. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy is not the conventional Iranian Navy. That distinction matters enormously, and it is one that most coverage of this crisis fails to explain properly. The conventional Iranian Navy operates in blue water, follows recognizable doctrine, and behaves in ways that great power navies understand and can model. The IRGC Navy is something fundamentally different. It was constructed from the ground up with a single operational purpose: asymmetric warfare in the confined, shallow, geographically complex waters of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Its doctrine is built on a principle called swarm tactics. The idea is conceptually straightforward, but operationally terrifying in its application. You do not try to match a superior adversary weapon for weapon, system for system, tonnage for tonnage. You overwhelm it. You attack from multiple vectors simultaneously with enough speed, coordination, and sheer numerical density that even the most advanced defensive systems are forced to prioritize, triage, and accept that some threats will get through. Think about what that means in practice. The IRGC Navy operates an estimated 500 to 1,000 fast attack craft, not conventional warships, not destroyers or frigates, small, fast, highly maneuverable vessels, some armed with anti-ship missiles, some carrying torpedoes and rockets, some functioning as precision delivery platforms for explosives, all designed to operate in dense swarms across a body of water that, at its narrowest point, is approximately 21 miles wide. Among the most significant platforms in this fleet are the PACAP missile boats, designed to approach at high speed while staying low on radar, sea-skimming profiles that make detection and interception genuinely difficult in congested waterways, and the Zulfiqar fast attack craft, capable of carrying torpedoes and rocket systems, purpose-built to generate chaos in close-range engagements. Now ask yourself, why were these assets not destroyed during the initial American strikes earlier this year? It is a legitimate question, and it deserves a serious answer. The answer is that a targeting package against a distributed, mobile, highly disaggregated fleet of hundreds of small vessels dispersed across ports, hidden warehouses, underground naval facilities, and coastal terrain is among the most complex operational challenges in modern warfare. These are not aircraft parked in rows on an airfield. They are not missile batteries at fixed coordinates. They are dispersed, concealed, and, in many cases, deliberately positioned to make preemptive destruction as difficult as possible. But that calculation is changing, and what is now reportedly on the targeting list represents a significant escalation in ambition and scope. Let me walk you through the operational logic of how the United States would approach the destruction of this fleet, because it is not a simple equation. And understanding the layers of that operation reveals exactly why Iran's leadership is in a state of genuine alarm. The targeting architecture is built in successive layers. The first layer is detection. Before anything can be destroyed, it must be found. And in a complex maritime environment filled with commercial shipping, coastal terrain, radar clutter, and deliberate Iranian concealment, finding 500 dispersed fast attack craft is a serious intelligence and sensor challenge. This is where the F-35C becomes one of the most consequential platforms in the American arsenal. Its radar system, the AN/APG-81 AESA, is capable of tracking multiple small targets simultaneously across vast sensor coverage areas. Detecting fast attack craft moving through the chaotic radar environment of the Persian Gulf is, for the F-35C, not an edge of capability performance. It is standard operation. The F-35 identifies targets, aggregates sensor data, and transmits targeting information to other strike assets in real time, functioning not merely as a strike aircraft, but as an airborne intelligence node feeding a networked kill chain. Once targets are identified, the second layer activates strike delivery. The F-15E Strike Eagle carries the range, payload capacity, and precision guidance systems to prosecute strikes against hardened facilities, warehouses, underground storage facilities, coastal infrastructure that supports the fast attack fleet. For fixed assets near the coastline, the F-15E represents lethal, high-precision delivery at extended range, but against mobile, fast-moving targets on open water, small boats scattering across the Strait at high speed, you need something different. You need a platform that can loiter, that can identify individual vessels, and that can engage them with concentrated, accurate firepower at low altitude. That is the A-10 Warthog's operational space, and it is a space the aircraft was essentially designed to own. The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger cannon fires 30mm rounds at an extraordinary rate of fire. A single burst from that weapon system striking a fiberglass fast attack boat produces a result that requires no further elaboration. The A-10 can prosecute multiple engagements per sortie, loitering over the target area in ways that faster, less fuel-efficient aircraft cannot sustain. Against a distributed swarm of small vessels, the A-10 is not merely effective, it is among the most operationally suited platforms the United States has ever fielded for this specific threat type. And then there is a third layer, one that is less well known but increasingly critical to understanding how the United States intends to handle not just the fast attack fleet, but the broader asymmetric threat environment that Iran has constructed. The OA-1K Skyraider II is an aircraft that most of the public has never heard of. It is currently operated by Air Force Special Operations Command. 18 are in active AFSOC hands, 45 are under contract. Combat entry is targeted for the fourth quarter of 2027, though the training pipeline is running at full intensity right now. What makes this aircraft strategically significant in the context of the Iranian threat is precisely what makes it appear unimpressive at first glance. It is a light attack and armed intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform, slow by modern standards, designed to operate from austere locations, capable of being disassembled, loaded into a single C-17 transport, flown anywhere on Earth, reassembled, and placed into combat operations within hours of landing. AFSOC's official characterization of its capability is any place, anytime, anywhere. That is not marketing language. That is a mission statement built on a specific operational reality. The OA-1K can reach conflict zones through logistical pathways that heavier, more sophisticated aircraft cannot access. It can operate from improvised strips. It can maintain persistent overwatch over a maritime environment for extended periods. And it can engage slow-moving threats, including drone swarms, including fast attack boats, with a precision and loiter time that frontline combat aircraft are simply not optimized to provide. This matters because Iran's swarm doctrine is not purely naval. It is integrated. The IRGC does not intend to send 500 fast attack boats racing across the Strait in isolation. The doctrine combines those boats with Shahed series drone swarms, cheap, numerous, difficult to intercept at scale, and with ballistic missile salvos designed to saturate air defense coverage. The combination of simultaneous threats across multiple domains is specifically designed to force American and allied forces into a defensive prioritization problem. Deploying an F-15E or an F/A-18 against a Shahed drone that costs a few $1,000s is not a sustainable exchange ratio. The OA-1K closes that gap. It can engage slow-moving drone threats at altitudes and speeds that match the threat profile, an asymmetric answer to an asymmetric problem. Now let me turn to the strategic dimension that sits beneath all of this military analysis, because without it, the operational picture makes no complete sense. On May 20th, Iran announced the creation of a new government agency. They called it the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. They published an official graphic. They produced a logo. They released a jurisdictional map. And in doing so, they declared a controlled maritime zone across the Strait of Hormuz that extends well beyond the 12 nautical miles that international maritime law permits any coastal state to claim. Understand what Iran is attempting to accomplish here. It is not merely asserting military presence. It is attempting to create a legal and institutional architecture, however internationally illegitimate, to support a permanent toll collection system over the world's most critical energy choke point. Approximately 20% of the world's traded oil passes through the Strait of Hormuz. That figure represents not just a share of global energy supply, it represents the economic oxygen supply of much of Asia, Europe, and the developing world. Japan, South Korea, India, China, and the Gulf states all depend on the unobstructed passage of energy through that 21-mile corridor. Any disruption of that flow does not merely affect oil prices, it affects industrial output, food transport costs, manufacturing chains, currency valuations, and the basic economic stability of governments across 3 continents. And Iran, fully aware of all of this, is attempting to assert permanent sovereign authority over that corridor, not just the temporary leverage of a military threat. Permanent, institutionalized control, backed by a government agency with an official logo and a jurisdictional map, dressed up in the language of sovereign governance. Secretary Rubio's response to this development was categorical. If Iran were to succeed in establishing a permanent toll system on the Strait of Hormuz, he warned, the same model would be replicated across 5 other strategic waterways around the world. The precedent being set is not merely regional, it is global. Every chokepoint, every critical passage, every narrow corridor through which global commerce moves becomes subject to the same logic the moment Iran is allowed to establish this model successfully. This is why the United States' response to the Persian Gulf Strait Authority was not diplomatic criticism. It was the movement of carrier strike groups, the cancellation of Memorial Day plans across the defense and intelligence community, and the delivery of a final offer with a deadline. Now let me talk about why the negotiations have effectively collapsed, and why the collapse is driven by something deeper than any single demand or counteroffer. Within the Iranian government, a profound and dangerous power consolidation is underway. The new commander of the IRGC, General Vahidi, has emerged as the dominant force shaping Iran's negotiating posture. He is not a pragmatist. He is not someone calculating how to extract the maximum concession while preserving Iran's core interests through compromise. He is a hardliner who appears genuinely willing to absorb military consequences rather than accept an agreement that constrains the IRGC's operational freedom and strategic ambitions. Behind him, Iran's supreme leadership has drawn an explicit red line. The nuclear program is not on the table. Iranian officials have reportedly been ordered not to discuss the nuclear file in any negotiation context, and the strategic logic behind that instruction is not irrational, even if it is extraordinarily dangerous. The Iranian regime's calculation is this: a nuclear weapon is the one development that places them permanently beyond the reach of Israeli preemption and American military pressure. If they achieve it, they believe they cannot be struck again. They believe it transforms their regional position from that of a besieged, sanctioned, battered state into that of a nuclear-armed power that other states, however reluctantly, must treat with a degree of deference they currently do not receive. The nuclear program is not a negotiating chip for Iran. It is the exit ramp from their current strategic vulnerability. And that gap between what the United States requires as a condition for any lasting agreement and what Iran is willing to place on the negotiating table is not a gap that shuttle diplomacy and creative language can bridge. It is a fundamental incompatibility between 2 sets of strategic interests that point in directly opposite directions. This is the impasse that Washington is now confronting, not a gap between negotiating positions, a gap between strategic visions. On the maritime front, the pressure is intensifying at a scale that should command serious attention. As of the most recent reporting, more than 100 commercial vessels that had been operating in and out of Iranian ports have been pushed back. The operational scope of American maritime enforcement in the region has reached a level of intensity that Iran's naval establishment has not faced in years. The Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group remains on station in the Arabian Sea, conducting continuous operations. The presence of American carrier-based air power within range of Iran's coastline is not a signal being sent quietly. It is a signal being sent at maximum volume, and yet the IRGC leadership appears to be reading that signal not as a reason to negotiate, but as a reason to accelerate the consolidation of leverage. The Persian Gulf Strait Authority is not a defensive move. It is an offensive one. It is Iran's attempt to create facts on the ground, or rather, facts on the water, before the military situation forces it back to a negotiating table it does not want to return to. The timing of that move tells you everything about what the IRGC actually believes. They do not believe the United States will sustain military operations indefinitely. They believe that time, domestic American political pressure, allied fatigue, and the economic consequences of prolonged disruption to global energy markets will eventually force Washington to accept terms closer to what Tehran demands. They are betting that the world's tolerance for the cost of confrontation is lower than their own. That is not an irrational bet, historically. But it may be a bet that underestimates both the current American resolve and the operational severity of what a second round of strikes, one targeting not just fixed infrastructure, but the IRGC Navy's dispersed fast attack fleet, would actually do to Iran's capacity to project the maritime threat it has spent decades constructing. There is a pattern to the current moment that is not coincidental. The operational cadence, the cancellation of official travel, the recall of defense personnel, the delivery of a final diplomatic communication with a clear deadline, is consistent with the preparatory pattern observed approximately 72 hours before the previous round of American strikes. The institutional rhythm of how Washington behaves when it is genuinely preparing military action has a signature, and that signature is present right now. This does not mean strikes are certain. Diplomacy can produce unexpected developments. Iran may yet calculate that the cost of continued refusal exceeds the cost of compromise. There are actors within Iran's own political architecture who understand that the IRGC's hardline posture is leading the country toward a confrontation it cannot afford on multiple levels simultaneously: economic, military, and in terms of the regime's basic domestic legitimacy. But what is certain is this: the margin for error is gone. The space for slow-moving negotiations, for deliberately vague language designed to preserve optionality on both sides, has been consumed. Washington has delivered a final offer through an official channel. Tehran has responded with rhetoric, and the people who run American defense and intelligence policy are canceling their holiday weekend to stand by for orders. That is the operational reality on the ground as of this moment. Let me be precise about what the global consequences of a second, more expansive round of strikes would actually mean, because this is the dimension that extends far beyond the Persian Gulf. A direct, sustained campaign against Iran's IRGC Navy, against its fast attack fleet, its coastal infrastructure, its drone storage facilities, its underground naval bases along the Strait, would represent a qualitative escalation beyond the earlier strikes on fixed military and nuclear-adjacent sites. It would signal that the United States has made a strategic determination that Iran's capacity to threaten the Strait of Hormuz must be physically degraded, not merely deterred. The consequences of that decision radiate outward in every direction. For global energy markets, even the anticipation of extended conflict in the Strait drives oil price movements that affect every economy on Earth. For America's regional partners, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, the destruction of Iran's naval swarm capability removes a direct threat against their own coastlines and shipping lanes that they have been living with for years. For China, which purchases enormous quantities of Gulf oil and has carefully positioned itself as a diplomatic interlocutor in the crisis, a resumption of strikes forces an extremely uncomfortable choice between its economic relationships with Iran and its need for stable Gulf energy flows. For the NATO allies that Rubio just addressed in Sweden, the message was unmistakable. The United States is not asking for military participation. It is telling partners to think clearly about what comes next and to plan accordingly. And for Iran itself, for the IRGC commanders who have built their careers and their institutional identity around the swarm doctrine, around the idea that 500 fast attack boats in a 21-mile strait represent an insurmountable deterrent, the question is now existential in a way it has not been before. Because the targeting package being discussed is not designed to send a message, it is designed to remove the capability. What should concern you most is not the military exchange itself. What should concern you is what happens after it. An Iran that has lost its fast attack fleet, its coastal drone infrastructure, its maritime deterrent, and its ability to threaten the Strait of Hormuz does not simply accept that outcome and return to the negotiating table as a compliant partner. It recalculates. It looks for other leverage points. And a regime that has already demonstrated its willingness to use proxy forces across Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, a regime that has been building its influence infrastructure across the region for 4 decades, does not lack for options when its primary deterrent is removed. The Houthi model in Yemen, the Hezbollah model in Lebanon, the network of militia forces across Iraq. These are not accidents of regional politics. They are deliberate instruments of Iranian strategic power projection, built precisely for the scenario in which Iran's conventional and semi-conventional military options are degraded by a superior adversary. Rubio's warning to NATO allies was not hypothetical. He was telling them explicitly, if this model, the maritime toll model, the chokepoint control model, is allowed to succeed in the Strait of Hormuz, it will be replicated. Other actors, in other straits, in other critical waterways, will draw the lesson that chokepoint control is achievable and effective. The strategic contagion risk is real, and it is global. This is where we are, not at the beginning of a crisis, not in the middle of a negotiation that is slowly building toward resolution, at a convergence point where military posture, diplomatic ultimatum, Iranian internal politics, and global economic stakes have all arrived at the same narrow moment simultaneously. The President of the United States is in Washington instead of at his son's wedding. His defense and intelligence officials are standing by on a holiday weekend. A final offer has been delivered. A deadline is running, and in Tehran, the IRGC's new commander is reportedly telling anyone who will listen that he is willing to go down with the ship. Here is what I want you to take away from this analysis. The world has a tendency to interpret the absence of an explosion as the presence of stability. It assumes that because previous crises in this region did not produce the catastrophic outcome that seemed imminent, this one will also resolve itself in the familiar pattern of escalation followed by retreat, followed by an uneasy calm. That assumption has been correct many times, and it has been wrong at the moments that actually mattered, the moments that did not resolve themselves quietly, the moments that crossed a threshold from which the situation could not return to what it had been. I am not telling you that this is one of those moments with certainty. What I am telling you is that the indicators that distinguish genuinely critical junctures from routine strategic noise are present right now in unusual concentration: the military positioning, the diplomatic finality, the internal Iranian dynamic, the institutional behavior of Washington's national security apparatus on a holiday weekend. Pay attention to what happens in the next 72 hours, because in geopolitics, the most consequential decisions are rarely announced in advance. They are recognized in retrospect by the world that inherited their consequences and wished it had understood the signals sooner.